All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Mark Isselhardt, Maple Specialist with UVM Extension. The presentation is going to cover a research project that I did last year, quantifying how much sap you get out of a tap hole when you hit brown wood. And this picture here is just sort of to illustrate what we're talking about. Obviously not best practices by any means. But I'm also going to start with a bit of an introduction about compartmentalization and how trees respond to that wound. It might be a review for some of you, but I think it's pretty important, and it has immediate impacts on your production and your bottom line. So I think it's worth talking about. I am recording this. I've actually previously recorded this talk, and it's available on the Extension website, so you can go check that out. I'm going to record today's as well, and hopefully it works, and I'll pick whichever one seems to be a better version. But if you have questions about this or about the data or really anything related to maple production, I'm available to at least try to help. So don't be shy and give me a call or shoot me an email or something. So you see that green line through the middle?
Yeah.
Apparently, when I did the walkthrough for this, I found out that someone chucked something at the TV, and that's what that is all about. So I apologize, the picture isn't as crisp and clear as I would have hoped. But when you're tapping, it's usually a time when there's a lot going on. You're trying to get your taps in. You got a tapping crew, trying to be as efficient as possible, and you don't have a lot to go on as far as where you put your tap hole. You can look for previous year's tap hole. If you're the type of person who has a regular pattern they'd like to follow, you can try to follow that. But at the end of the day, the person who's holding the drill is going to have to make a choice where they think the best place to put that tap hole is. And there's a good chance you're going to hit clean wood, but occasionally you can hit brown wood. And that could be an old tap hole under there, or it could be an old branch stub, it could be just about anything. You just don't know because we don't have the X-ray vision. We can't see exactly what's going on under the bark. But after you made that tap hole, you're pretty much committed to that tap hole. So you want to take that little extra time to make sure you're setting yourself up for the best possible tap hole. And I think the data I'm going to show will support that. When you do tap, not everyone's going to hold, put their hand under the drill and collect all the chips and look at them, but occasionally if there's snow on the ground, you'll be able to see what's coming out of the tap hole. On the left, and the picture isn't all that great, unfortunately, but you really want to see that nice creamy kind of blonde chips coming out of there. They want to be a little bit moist, but not sopping wet, obviously, but they want to look fresh, almost springy in a way. If you start getting wood chips that look like the ones on the right, that are brown, especially if they start to look dry, you've hit into some area of wounding inside the tree. It could be an old tap hole, could be some rot, who knows. You are going to have, and we know this in general, you're going to get a lot less sap when you hit brown wood. But one of the problems with tubing systems are great, right? You don't have to go to every tree every day to dump a bucket. You don't have to lug heavy sap different places. Those are all good things. But what tubing systems do is it takes away that individual tree data, if you will. So now you don't know what that individual tap hole is producing. You might see some sap in the drop line and say, okay, things are okay. But you don't know if that one tap hole is producing a tiny bit of sap or a more reasonable amount, because it all gets blended together in the tubing system. If you start seeing a lot of brown chips, you know that there are going to be some issues. And I'm going to walk you through some of the reasons why you might have those issues. And I'm going to end with data to show you exactly how much you get when you hit brown wood. So it's a good idea, just in general, whoever's doing your tapping, one, they shouldn't be like on their third Red Bull of the day and trying to set a new world's record for the number of taps in a day, because that's not going to end up being probably the highest quality tap holes, okay? And they should be paying attention to not just that one little section of bark where the drill is going in. They should be thinking about the whole plant. everything from the fine twigs all the way down. It doesn't mean you have to sit there and measure everything, but just take it all in. Is there something obvious going on in the crown? And you might want to start from when you are done gently tapping in that spout, when you go to the next tree, that's the time you want to look up, and as you're walking there, just take in the whole plant if you can. It's going to pay off for sure. So in general, we know brown wood bad, clean, fresh wood good. But we don't have a lot of information, or at least we didn't have a lot of information about how bad is it. There are some other things that, and this is a big list, I don't expect you to memorize, but there are a lot of things that can contribute to hitting brown wood more often. And this is a list of some of them. Tree growth, I think we can all agree if a tree isn't growing, for one, it's really bad, it's dead. But if it's growing very, very slowly, it's not going to be accumulating new wood fast enough. And you're going to end up having a hard time finding a place to put a new tap hole. I like to think about a tree. Tree growth is like every year a tree is wrapping a new tree around itself. That's what a growth ring is. Every year, new one, new one. Think about putting on a jacket, then another jacket. You get bigger and bigger. So tree growth is obviously important. Trees are going to grow as much as they can, given the abundance of light, water, minerals. We can help them put on more growth by doing careful management, thinning a little bit, not too much, but a little bit. There was a talk earlier today about liming and the benefits of liming in adjusting the nutrition, the calcium in your forest soils. So there are some things you can do to help tree growth. Competition is probably one of the biggest. But again, it's not one of these things where a little is good and a lot is better. So you say, okay, I'm going to thin 1/4 of a tree's crown, maybe 2 at most. If you do all 4 quarters of your tree and think you're doing a really great job, you're probably setting yourself up for windthrow, sun scald, fine root damage. So it doesn't always mesh well with a permanent tubing system, but taking a more cautious approach is probably going to pay off in the long run. Definitely tree size is a factor, right? So bigger trees, it'll be easier to find a place to put a new tap hole. Drop line length, like if we all said, okay, 4-inch drop lines. Everyone make 4-inch drop lines. Pretty soon you're going to have a lot of tap holes all in this one area, and that's not good. So the length of your drop line and then using it to actually go to different places on the tree are going to help avoid hitting stained wood. All these things, bit size. If you used a hole saw, 2-inch hole saw, instead of a 5/16 hole, you'd make a lot more wounding and you'd have a hard time finding clean wood, right? Not that I'm advocating that by any means, but you can see how tap hole diameter can play a part. Number of taps. We still see tapping guidelines that reference 4 taps per tree, 3 taps per tree. In general, we recommend 1 tap, regardless of diameter. When you get into the really large trees, you can add a second tap, but just know you're not going to double the sap production. It's going to be some percentage less. Some of the data from Proctor suggests it might be around an additional 40% on top of that first tap, but it's not doubling. And that has a little to do with vacuum. You might double it if your buckets, a big tree with buckets and good clean wood, but I'm just assuming that everyone's doing tubing and vacuum. I think that's not fair to assume that, but number of taps can definitely play a part. They used to be standard practice, the little hole on the tee, that was for a nail. You could anchor your tee right there. How many people pulled that nail and moved it up and down? Maybe some people did, maybe some people didn't. But moving your laterals can also help expand the area where you can tap and get more clean wood. And then what's the history? Were these trees peppered? Did you just get on this parcel of land and they're not looking so good, they've been tapped for a long time? Or is this fresh, new taps? Those can all play a part in how likely it is that you're going to hit stained wood. And this slide right here actually comes from a talk that Abby Vandenberg from the Proctor Center has given. that talks about she has a computer model that you can access. It's on the Proctor website, and you can plug in variables for all these variables. You can plug in what your average growth rate is, how long your drops are, all these things, and it'll actually spit out it'll kind of give you a red or green color to say whether or not are you tapping in a way based on these criteria. Is it likely you're going to start hitting brown wood or not? So green would be good, red would be bad. It's pretty neat thing. You can play around with it. Find it on the Proctor website. Any questions about that? Here's an indication. A 3-tapper. That's obviously old PVC tubing, and it's a pretty old picture, but it's really there just to point out that if you're tapping all on one side, I mean, we still hear that too. Always tap on the south side of the tree. Not so much with people who, attend talks, attend conferences, but you do hear it. And while some years that might be true, you might get a little more sap on the south side. There are going to be other years where it's really hot, and being on the north is going to be more advantageous. And I'll tell you what, if you only tap on the south side of the tree, you're going to kill that portion of the tapping area, because you're just going to run out of clean wood, and you're going to get more wounding than you would if you'd spaced it around. So drop the number of taps in that situation, make the drops longer, and don't be afraid to tap on the north side of the tree. So this, the whole idea of measuring how much sap you get when you hit brown wood came up from work that we did looking at tapping below the lateral line. Does anyone understand the concept, what I'm talking about, tapping below the lateral line? Basically, it's what you would, if you drove down the road and saw all the spouts down here, you probably think that person just got into sugaring, they don't really know what they're doing. Because it just looks really weird, right? We always tap above. Well, one of the things you can do to avoid hitting brown wood is to tap in a different place. And so we did some work looking at, again, on an individual tree basis with multiple trees, how much sap do you get when you tap below? And we did that at Proctor, where some of the big trees have been tapped for a very long time. It's not the best soils. And we were having, especially on our 2-tap trees, we were hitting brown wood 10, 11, or more % of the time. Now, we didn't know how much it was impacting our production, but we knew it wasn't good. And so when we started doing this tapping below the lateral line work, we had the benefit of knowing what that individual tree was giving for sap. The purpose was to look at, okay, how much sap do you get above? How much do you get, which would be a control, basically, what you normally do. How much would you get tapping below? And then we had a third treatment, which is tapping below but with a check valve. So those 3 bars on the right were all season-long sap production, comparing tapping below the lateral with tapping above. And we found there was no significant difference in yield, which was really positive because you have a much larger area you can tap into. When we did our above treatment, we hit brown wood 2 out of the 10 times. Was it 2 out of the 10? It was at least 2 out of the 10 times. And we were, well, that's not good. But we still collected the sap. And what we saw was, if you take just those trees, that's the red bar all the way on the left, just the trees from above that hit stained wood, we saw a huge reduction. It's actually just over a 60% reduction in sap yield on those few trees we hit stained wood. When you factor those same trees with the other ones that were clean, that's that other bar above with containing stain, there was a drop in production. Does that kind of make sense? I'm kind of condensing a whole hour-long talk into a short period of time. But basically, it tipped us off to say, hey, there's a significant reduction here, and it might be worth looking at as its own project rather than as a byproduct of another project. So significant reduction, 60% reduction. Interestingly, no differences in sap sweetness. So across the board, they were all the same sweetness, just a lot less. important to talk a little quickly about how a tree responds to tapping. Again, we don't have the benefit of X-ray vision. It's hard enough to measure, understand how plants work, but we do know that when you make a wound, and this isn't just tapping, this could be, skitter blight on the base of the tree, it could be anything, that a sapsucker, bird, it could be a branch breaks off. The tree responds to that wound, and it's an active process. The tree uses energy to create chemicals and barriers to prevent infection from spreading out throughout the plant. And if you think about a tree as like a dense collection of straws, that's oversimplifying it, but just think about a tree as a dense collection of straws that are really good at moving moisture up and down. You can imagine why it would be a good idea if you didn't want to have a huge infection, you'd want to shut those pipes down when those pipes get damaged. So a tree has a process called compartmentalization. And that's, like I said, it's an active process. The tree uses energy, the same energy that a tree uses to flush new leaves in the spring, same energy it uses to not die in the wintertime. Some of that same stored energy is being used to make chemicals to wall off infection. So tapping makes some of that, it's the same type of wound. And can you see, this is an illustration, it's a drawing, but can you see that there's an old tap hole there, and that staining is going up and down? It can be a little abstract, but, and those cookies on the right, those are basically taken at different elevations going away from the tap hole. The top cookie on the right, upper right, is right about where the tap hole is, and then the next one down is a little smaller because it's further away from that wound. Can you see that the staining is much harder for the tree to wall off up and down than it is side to side? And that's just because the part of the tree that you're tapping into, the xylem, it has these vessels that are, I'll show you a cool picture, but they're pretty big compared to the other parts of the wood, and it's designed to really move a lot of water during the growing season. It just makes it harder for the tree to shut that down when there's a problem. So you get more staining above and below than you get side to side. If it was all the same, then you'd see almost like a big circle blob of stain. It wouldn't be long like that. So the number of tap holes is obviously going to impact how much compartmentalized wood, how much brown wood is created every year. And the growth is replacing, putting new conductive wood, new fresh, clean wood on to make up for what's removed. You can see in this diagram, there's actually new wood that's grown a few years since it was tapped. Can you see that? The rate of growth, obviously, is going to dictate how quickly you could tap in that same location. The tree doesn't fill the hole in. It never fills in the hole. It just covers it over. And depending on how fast the tree is growing, it will determine how quickly you can go back to that same area and tap again. This is just another illustration to show you what a gentleman named Alex Shigo, he was a researcher with the Forest Service, he really refined and developed the system that we understand as compartmentalization in trees. And he talked about it in terms of different walls. So imagine this brown area of stain. The tree produced that by responding to the wound. Not all those walls are the same strength. And he chose to define it 1 through 4. 1 is the weakest wall, 4 is the strongest wall. I just want to walk you through real quickly what those walls are. Wall 1 is those pipes I was telling you about, those xylem vessels. Relatively, they're tiny, they're microscopic, but they're relatively big compared to the other parts of the wood. Those things are much harder to shut down, so those are the weakest wall. The next strongest wall, I wish I had a pointer, but is here. It's illustrated as red, and I should say this is just a cartoon. This is not a microscopic picture, but the red is the late season wood, Can you guys all visualize a growth ring that has a little bit of early wood and a little bit of late wood? The late wood has a little thicker cell walls. That's a little bit better wall than wall 1. Wall 3, here he chose to illustrate it as a brick or a stone wall. That's actually produced by the ray cells. This is where starch is stored in the tree. This is the same place where we're getting the sugar out of the tap hole. There are cells that radiate out from the center of the tree in all directions. That's where the tree is storing starch. It stores a higher concentration in the roots, but it stores it throughout the plant. There's just a higher concentration in the roots. It stores it in the stem, stores it in the fine twigs. So that structure, those cells that run out from the center of the tree, represent the next strongest barrier, the next strongest wall. And the last wall, and it doesn't even have a number up there, is the next year's growth. Okay, so when that new growth starts in the spring, that's actually the strongest wall for infection or staining compared to all three. Now that's, if you thought that was abstract, wait till you see this picture. So, bear with me. So here I have a cookie cut out of the tree. Did everyone see that there's bark here? So the tree was growing like this. Obviously there was a circle here. Tree was up here, stem down here, roots down here. I want you all to visualize that we're looking straight down on top of this surface with magnification. That's what you're looking at here. I know your eyes are going to see these dark lines and want to make them into growth rings, but they're not. Okay? I'm going to walk you through it. But can everyone see those big circles? Those are the big vessels I was telling you about. Those are basically the big pipes where water is being pumped through during the growing season, and that's where sap is coming through during the sugaring season. Can you see there's a lot fewer of those than those smaller circles? And that's just the nature of maple wood or wood in general. When we tap, so here, this is kind of how this would be. To orient yourself. I know I'm kind of pushing the limit of, especially after lunch, but this is pretty much what we're looking at. The tap hole would come in here, and the ray cells are coming out of the center like that. These dark lines are actually the ray cells. They're dark because I stain them with iodine, and when you put iodine, if you remember from school, put iodine on a potato, it'll change color because of all the starch. Same thing. There's a lot of starch stored in those ray cells. So, the last part I'll point out is that the yellow circles, those are the fibers. That's what gives wood its strength. That's the reason why a baseball bat is so effective. It's not because it's made of all these big pipes, these big vessels. It's the fibers that give wood its strength. And they're there to support the vessels. If you were only made of vessels, you probably wouldn't be nearly as strong, couldn't be as tall. Okay, so wall 1 forms there. Wall 1 forms in these vessels. It's not one continuous vessel from the tiny little root hair all the way up to the twig. It's multiple vessels stacked on each other. Trees do this so that there's some redundancy. You can imagine if you had just one continuous straw and something happened to that straw, the tree's ability to move water would be really effective. So there's multiple pathways for water to get through. So they're big, yes, and they can move a lot of water, yes, but they're not one continuous pipe from the bottom to the top. So that's wall 1. Wall 2, I should have repeated these little dots up here, but can you see that those cells are thicker? That's the late season wood. So this is wall 2. But then right at the top of the screen, you see where they start to get thicker again? That would be another wall 2. Everyone with me? Okay, this might look a little more familiar. So here's a cookie, and there's a cookie. And you're looking right down. This one went right through the middle of that tap hole. Can you see that there really isn't that much staining side to side? It is a little wider than the tap hole itself, but not that much wider. And that's because wall 3 is a stronger barrier. It's a better barrier for discoloration and infection. Now we're zoomed in a little bit one more time, and then here you see wall 4. That's that new growth. You know, it gets wounded at some point in time. The next growth ring that comes on is going to be that strongest barrier. Yeah, Brian.
So that last shot showed that the growth rings were getting much smaller. So you can see the last probably 20, 25 years,
Yeah.
Very slow growth. I don't know if this study encompassed this, but do you have a feeling for fast growing versus slow growing wood? Is one better or worse at compartmentalization?
No, we didn't really look at that. So thinking about it in terms of like the anatomy, I would think that slower growing would actually be smaller staining, because you'd have more walls per volume of wood. You'd have more wall 3s. You'd have more, but it's a trade-off that you may not want to make. It'd probably be much better just to do a better job spacing out your tap holes. I'm never going to advocate for trying to ramp down your growth. So, can everyone see too, like, something look different about the growth rate of that tree right around the tap hole? Does everyone see that? Okay. So that's what's called callus tissue. It's actually, the tree stimulates and puts on more wood right around that site of infection. And that's, again, it's an active process where it's like, hey, there's an injury here. We got to do something about it. And so growth rates ramp up. Again, it doesn't fit. This is not going to continue to fill in the tap hole. It just covers it over. But you don't have to get too far away from that point of injury before the growth rates are really more normal or typical for the rest of the tree. So callus tissue is definitely a thing, but it's really localized right around the tap hole or the woodpecker hole or whatever the injury is to the tree. All right. You can see the tapping intensity is going to have a part to play in how much clean wood you have to tap into. And I hope I made the point that having trees grow well, a little room to grow but not too much, is going to have the best chance at hitting a clean amount of wood. Any questions about that? And there might be a time when you're going to have to cut a maple tree in order to promote growth in the remaining crop trees. So, it's okay to do that. If, again, you want to be conscious about it, you want to have it be part of a plan, not just going here and there, but force is a competition, and light is a limiting factor. And if you can promote the growth in the younger, stronger, healthier trees, it may mean you have to cut a few that are not doing so hot. Is that a question? Yeah.
So after that grows more, and you retap,
Yep.
do the same thing. You can see the same scenario around the next.
Yep.
We actually would sat still for 15 years or so. We just realized that back up 5 years ago. So I'm thinking all those old maples probably also should be healed over.
Yeah. So did you hear the question? Like if sounds like they have a sugar bush where it hadn't been tapped for 15 years,
Yeah, right.
something like that. So depending on how fast the trees are growing, you might have 1.5 inches of new wood beyond the last time it was tapped. It really is dependent on how those trees are
Well, I
growing.
was tapped for 40 years.
Yeah.
Looked like it's so
This staining, functionally, it's really no longer part of the tree. Assuming it doesn't get a secondary infection of some sort of decay fungi, it's just sitting there. It's just an area of non-conductive wood sitting in the tree. It doesn't really impact the tree anymore. If you get a secondary infection, somehow another type of fungi gets in there and starts to spread the decay, then you could have a problem. But in general, they're just in there. Yeah.
Now, on this here, when you tap a tree, your sap is going side to side up and down. Now, does that affect the flow of your sap?
That's a good question. So, believe it or not, we don't know precisely how much sap is coming from where. We know more sap is coming from above than from, say, across. But we do know you can get flow across. You can get flow from below, but it has to be vacuum induced. You have to draw it up with a vacuum. So I don't have numbers to give you, but for sure, the bulk of the sap you're collecting after a good run is coming from above. And part of the reason, it's kind of goes along with this, right? It's much easier for that moisture to move in that direction. So it's good for compartmentalization, but it's bad for sap flow, trying to draw it from across.
Yeah. Your first run is coming down the tree,
Yep.
right?
Yes.
Then it starts going back up again.
When you get a freeze, that's when you get the drawing of the moisture. So if you have a bucket tree, all you're collecting is from above. You're not getting any sap from below with a bucket tree. That's why after a few days, if you don't get a freeze, there's nothing coming out of the tap hole. But if you have vacuum on that tree, you're going to continue to get some sap. Not as much as you get after a thaw, after a nice freeze, but you're going to get some. And that's just because it's drawing it out. That's good. Yeah, we'd love to know. It would be great to know how much. Because it also matters too, we'd love to know exactly where the sugar is coming from. We don't even know that. It'd be great to know where, spatially in the tree we're taking that sugar from. But we don't have a good sense of that either.
You can't implant cameras, maybe.
Cameras? No. No. Some people have done some work actually, we do it on time. Some people have done some work actually aging the carbon in the sugar in the sap. So, and that is pretty interesting work too. Not related to sugaring directly, but if the sugar you're taking out is just from the last couple of years, that's one thing. If you're tapping into really old stores, it might make a difference in terms of how sustainable is, modern sugaring. So, what they found was the age was relative to how deep you're going in. So if you go really deep, then you're tapping into some older stuff. But that wasn't this project. So I'll just another. This is 7/16 holes, but just that's lousy. You can't see it. But these are just two 7/16 holes, the older style. A lot of people want to know how big is the stain? How high does it go? How low does it go? It varies. Abby is actively, actually these cookies here are from Abby's project, trying to come up with good numbers on how big that is. And she can already tell you before all the data is analyzed that it really depends. There's a lot of variability. Some trees are just going to be better at compartmentalizing than others. Healthy could be a part, yep. But she will have some data. Hopefully by next year we'll have some presentation on that.
In
Yep.
that picture, that example, someone did a good job in those 2 years on that scenario.
Getting away from not hitting stain
Because
wood.
they just moved over
Yep.
enough, and
Yep.
but it's quite a streak.
It can be very big. Yep. Or it can be small. I mean, I've seen it 2 or 3 inches, but you can't count on that for sure. Back when the PFA tablet was the hot new thing, twice as much, 24 inches, you'd have stinging. That was really good that was a short-lived thing. Because what the tablet did was it shut down some of that, or it slowed the tree's natural process of compartmentalizing. So that wall 1 just couldn't get shut off as quickly. And so that staining just extended higher and higher, or in both directions, really. Okay, now we're into the data part. So the question is, all right, you've talked about a lot of bad things about hitting stained wood. Fine, but how bad is it? Like, what's the actual impact? What's the bottom line impact if I hit some stained wood? Actually, that's a review from the last slide. 60% reduction based on a different project. So I wanted to get some actual numbers just on this one project. So relatively small. Oh, that got cut off. I used 20 trees that had a history of tapping. Not a great site by any means, but they had some previous history of tapping. Didn't have vacuum there, so I did some natural vacuum using 3/16 tubing. Brand new tubing, 1 tap per lateral line, and I had individual chambers for each tree. So I knew exactly how much sap came out of that tap hole. Both trees that I tapped directly into 1 inch above previous tap hole, so I knew I was going to hit stained wood, and then 10 trees into clean wood to make sure to be more realistic about what you'd actually get on that year, because obviously you can't compare different years. And if you don't have the ability to measure an individual tree production, it's really hard to make comparisons because it's so variable. Trees can be very different, and we see it in our other studies. Like different trees really put on different amounts of sap. So 10 trees into brown wood, 10 trees into clean wood. Total sap production for the season, total sap sweetness gives you a total syrup production for the year. And then I also wanted to look at the wood chips. I wanted to know, is there an impact of, what happens if you hit a little bit of brown? Just the last little bit hits brown versus hitting a lot of brown. Obviously, I couldn't look in the tree any more than anyone else, so I didn't know exactly how much I was going to hit. So I actually collected, as best I could, all the chips that came out of that tap hole. And, if you started going around and saw this in your woods, you probably have to talk with your crew, right? I think we can all pretty much agree that that's not best practices. However, now remember, just 1 inch above, they were 5/16 holes, 1.5 inch deep, pretty standard. 3 out of the 10, I hit no stain, just 1 inch above an old tap hole. And this is one of those times where science kind of gives you an unexpected result, and you have to kind of think about it for a while and try to determine what was going on. And I think I did this already. Every time I give this talk, I say I'm not going to do it. But I talk about the staining like this, right, as if it's perfectly vertical. But wood grain is not perfectly straight. Wood grain can pitch one way or the other. You can have spiral grain. That staining will follow the grain, will follow where the vessels, how they're oriented. So presumably those 3 out of the 10, the staining was off enough. The grain was odd enough that it just went around it. So, but it was good to know. Just to revisit how this actually looked in practice, this is a illustration. You've got this area of stained wood, non-conductive wood. This tree is grown. This is not one of my study trees. I just wanted to show you what it would look like. That's new wood that's grown on the outside. Remember which wall that is? 4. Nice. Any foresters in here get bonus points on their credit if they want. And then bark. So you're drilling through all those things. You're hoping to hit all conductive wood, but you're probably, in this project, I wanted to hit stained wood, some of the. So I actually collected all those chips. I made this goofy looking plastic apron thing and held it directly under the drill, collected all of them. If it got windy, I had to pick through and get all the wood chips, but as best I could, I feel like I did a pretty good job getting every single chip. I put them all together, put them in a vial for all 20 trees, brought them back to the lab, froze them, and then later I sorted them to try to get the weights of each and relatively how much clean versus how much brown. So when you empty those vials, you kind of look at this jumble. So the chips on the left are from clean. You can see it's a little yellow.
Yeah.
That's because they've actually oxidized a little bit. When they came out of the tree, they looked creamy and nice. They've changed a little bit. But even though they've changed color, you can definitely see a difference compared to the non-conductive ones. Oh, that's a review as well. So when I sorted them, then I can actually look at what's the ratio of clean wood to stained wood. That would be your bark. A little bit of conductive wood, a whole lot of stained wood, and then obviously clean tap holes would look more like this. There's going to be some brown, but that's the inner bark and the outer bark. So that's what that looks like. And then I could weigh them and give an approximate percentage of each. Okay, you ready for some results? All right. Big reduction. And actually, it was really right in line with the data that we saw with the tapping below the lateral. 60% reduction. Now it's actually worse than that, because that 60%, that's with the three trees that had no stained wood factored in. When you take those out, it's down to 75%. So that's 75% off the top. That's before a squirrel finds your tubing. It's before the vacuum pump blows up. It's before a tree falls on your line, before the people missed some spouts. All those things that happen, this is right off the top. So it really is important to factor in avoiding stained wood. Really important. And I hope I pointed out all the ways in which you can help avoid that, both in the moment but also long term. Growing healthy trees is going to set you up for the best possible chance at not hitting brown wood. No difference in sweetness, which makes sense. I mean, the little bit of conductive wood I hit is basically the same as what I hit with the clean holes. Any questions about that? Yeah.
Now, tapping into dark wood, does that affect your vacuum?
So the question is, if you hit brown wood, does it affect your vacuum? So it depends on what you mean by dark wood. And I should say too, this was not the point of this study, to look at impacts on vacuum. It was just to look at sap production. If you're just hitting a compartmentalized area that has no other issues, it's not like going into a hollow or something, it shouldn't make a big difference, if any. But, I'm sure everyone who's tapped a tree has probably hit a tree that whistled or something happened, then yes, you would. A lot of times I'll get the question, okay, I hit brown wood, now what do I do?
Right, that's what I was gonna ask.
Well, it depends. One of these days we're going to go up here and say, absolutely, without a doubt. No. Well, it depends because one, if you're certified organic, you're only allowed that one tap hole in that year. The regulations don't allow for tapping into another hole just because you hit stained wood. So that would limit your ability. Same with UVA, really, current use. Yeah, those guidelines are pretty much set up for a certain number of taps, 1 or 2 per year, based on diameter. So you're probably limited there. On a practical level, if all that wasn't in existence, I want to know the answer to that. I don't have it. One idea is to do a third treatment. So do regular clean wood, do another one hitting brown wood, and a third where hitting the brown wood and then do another hole, and see if the yield goes back to regular. You're doubling this. You're not doubling the staining, but you're increasing the amount of stain. So it's probably not a good practice in general. You should probably just live with it, unless it's one of those whistlers or something where it's not just compartmentalized wood, it's actually decay. Yeah. So
if you hit a spot that's been compartmentalized,
yep.
and it's dead, it really isn't part of the treating one.
Yep.
How's it going to stain any worse if you're tapping on wood that you'd just be causing
Right.
the damage you would have anyway if you put one hole in it?
So presumably there is at least one more growth ring since that other tap hole, and possibly more because the tree has grown somewhat. So there'd be more stain there because you'd be going through some conductive wood. So it wouldn't be doubling it because you wouldn't be going into completely new tissue and making new staining, but it would increase it. And I should say that part of the work that Tim and Abby are doing, looking at, I think it's like 8 different treatments about how to maybe keep tap holes open from the fall into the spring, or what's the impact of tapping in the dead of winter versus more traditional times. I think they're going to have a little staining data on top of that, which might look a little bit at what you're asking about.
Yeah, we got a neighbor that didn't pull his taps till about a month ago.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that's going to work out.
Yeah, that's an interesting one too, because you're definitely delaying that callus tissue from forming, but internally, the staining shouldn't be any bigger because you let the tap hole in. Again, I don't think that's a good idea. You should pull them right after the season.
So what creates the stain?
The tree creates the stain. The tree creates chemicals.
It's just a healing.
It is the healing process. Yep. It's compartmentalizing. Yep.
So if we're organic and we hit brown, should we just drill another hole in the other side of the tree?
So let me get to the last little bit here. It might help. So remember I did measure all those chips? So here's an example of one that had clean wood. A little bit of bark, but then most of it was that conductive tissue. And I had some that had a little bit of little compartmentalized, but a lot of brown stained wood. And what I did is I took those, because each one of those trees had a different ratio of clean wood to stained wood.
Because of the growth, there's a different rate.
Yep, or I just hit less of it when I was tapping. Remember, I collected all the chips. So I put on I compared how much brown with how much sap I got. And I'm hoping you can see this slide. Can you see that? Along the y-axis is syrup production, and the x-axis is percent non-conductive or stained wood. So, 0 would be no stain whatsoever. 100 would be all brown. And there's a very clear trend. So the more staining you get, the less sap, and therefore syrup you would get. So there's probably a balance point, going back to the hypothetical of what if NOFA didn't exist and all that stuff. There's probably a point at which it makes sense to drill a second hole. But I can't make that decision for you. And in general, if you're having a hard time getting clean wood, you probably should be focusing on other things, promoting healthy trees, doing careful active management, and not thinking about putting additional wounds on those trees, because if you're hitting stained wood, it means they're not. Something about your tapping practices, either the number of taps per tree, or the length of your drop lines, or something, is causing it to happen. Because in general, you really shouldn't, trees should be growing enough that you don't need to hit stained wood, really ever. Especially if you factor in the data we have about tapping below the lateral. You're kind of doubling, in a way, the amount of tappable wood. So I guess I wouldn't really advocate putting a new hole in. I would focus more big picture on making sure everyone who has a drill in their hand is taking a little extra time to look at the whole tree, avoiding old tap holes as best they can. Yeah, Charlie.
So there you are with your tree, you tap it, brown wood comes up.
Yep.
Again, we're talking vacuum now, is there any advantage to just taking your drop and plugging it in and saying goodbye and walk on, knowing that tree that you picked a bad spot or that it's a wounded tree already?
Again, you have to factor in everything, like, what does the tree look like? I mean, I'm sure we've all tapped trees and kind of like, maybe I'll get one more year out of this tree.
Exactly.
But there are others who are like, heck, why did I hit brown wood there? So it's going to have to be a little bit of a game time decision, I think. But then I think seeing this, if you only hit a little bit of brown, I think it's pretty obvious. It's proportional to how much you get.
Yeah.
And you're just going to have to make the call. I would say, though, that everyone on your tapping crew should be at least somewhat aware of what this means. Because, again, this is all off the top. There's nothing about anything that happens downstream. This is production that you lose, and it's not going to come back. So it is worth paying attention to. Yeah?
Did the sap contents change the sweetness from the white to the brown wood?
So I didn't take sap from just brown and just clean, but the brown ones had a little bit of clean and a lot of brown, and there was no difference.
Just fall.
Yeah.
Isn't there a organic guideline on distance to the old holes? I think it's 6 inches
Yeah.
in any direction. That doesn't seem correct.
Yeah.
And it seems really hard to achieve.
Did everyone hear that question? Basically, you're getting into the idea of a pattern tapping. I think some of the organic guidelines have a specific number of inches up and over from an old tap hole.
Tree over and fall down.
So I'm not a fan of that, because I think one, it's not really rooted in how a plant works, but it makes people think about trees as like these perfect cylinders that have no other imperfections. And I think you could get really tunnel vision and just think, okay, I got my 6 and 3, 6 and 3, 6 and 3. Next thing you know it, you're starting to hit old tap holes because all you had in your head was this pattern. And I've heard lots of different combinations. I think the system would work well, brand new trees have never been tapped, to a point, but it's not going to work forever. And not a fan of something that makes people focus less on what's in front of them. I've heard lots of combinations of numbers, and I think too, I pointed out those 3 that I didn't hit any stained wood at all. You could have gone right into the stain if you had a certain pattern, because it was pitched one way or the other. So,
Yeah, you hit brown wood, you think that you had, in your mind, you had picked a great spot.
Yeah.
And you hit brown wood.
Marcia?
Did you use check valves too in your study?
No, these were just regular polycarbonate 5/16 spouts.
And yours were all above the line?
Yes.
Okay. And the earlier study about below the line, so virtually all things being equal, there's no difference between tapping and above?
Based on two years of data, 2 pretty different years as far as sap flow, they were no different.
And do you, folks in Proctor, have any sense of whether a check valve would impact the amount of staining or
Should go. Is it?
That's an interesting question, because if the reason why these check valves work so well is because they prevent some sap being reabsorbed into the tree.
Go for the next year then.
I guess my gut feeling is no, but I guess I could be convinced that there might be a way. There's no plans to do any. This is pretty destructive sampling. This is, Abby's work where she's cutting trees down. It's kind of a hard sell. It's good that she's so nice because she calls people and asks them to cut their trees down. We can't do this kind of research all the time. You end up, running out of trees to tap. So. Yes.
Obviously, the staining process of compartmentalization is not an instant progress. You tap now, by September or next year, you may not even see that stain yet. You may be able to if you look real careful.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it would shut down basically all at once, or whether it's going to take 3-4 years. I didn't know whether it's going to go with anybody had an idea. How long does it take for this compartmentalization to sort of be complete?
That's a really good question. Also, we don't have an answer for. The question you didn't hear was how long does it take for that staining column to form? Corinne, yeah.
When we do the diagnosis of the hilling tap for the health diagnostic, we have a range that if it takes more than 3 years, then your tree is not that growing much. So we put it the level at 3 years maximum. After that, it can broaden some.
I think it's definitely a year. It could be a little more than a year, but we don't really have great information on how long it takes. I think we might be running up against our time here, so if you have other questions, catch me in the hall or something. Thank you.